Hey, Michelle, how are you? Hey, Yan Hui. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Brandley. Is because I'm unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, it works now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming to my brown bag presentation today. I think it's about time, right?
Yeah.
Shall we wait for like 1 to 2 minutes and catch up like everything, or shall we start?
It's up to you. I think usually there are a couple, 3 folks to roll in the first minute. So maybe wait till 12:01. Give them a minute of grace.
Sounds great. Okay, let's give 1 more minute.
Are you on campus?
No, I'm at home actually.
Is that a fake background or all of those your books?
I told my students it's on my books, but
yeah, it's a library. That's a library.
Yeah. Well, it's not real actually. It's like a fiction one.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people ask, "Wow, you have so many books," and I say, "Yeah, you want to be permanently head damaged, you have to just hate all those books." But it's not real actually. So a lot of people say, "I'm in a library or in a bookstore." I say, "No, it's at home." Okay, it's 12:01. I think it's time to start. And thank you for coming to my brown bag presentation today. And I'm going to present one of my paper named, there we go, To Run a Tight Ship or Not, How to Release Subsidiary Initiative in Emerging Multinational Corporations. So I'd like to introduce my presentation by asking you to take a look at this picture in which you can see 3 countries get involved, which are British, France, and Spanish. So this is actually a very famous battle called the Battle of Trafalgar, happened in 1805. It's actually a Navy engagement between British Royal Navy against the combined fleet of French and Spanish navies actually. So this is one of the war during the War of Third Coalition of the Napoleonic Wars. And the reason I want to bring this up is because there's like different strategies adopted by the admirals. If you're familiar with history or familiar with the sea battles, you should know that there's something called the line of battle tactic, which is basically 2 fleets that will just line up in parallel lines, and with all the cannons on the side, just and they shoot at each other. So this is very, the fundamental strategy or tactic for the Navy. And you can see that if you have more numbers of warships, and you have more cannons, and you have more powerful cannons, most likely will win. So back then, this battle, there was there was around 33 warships from the combined fleet of Spanish and French, and there are about 28 ships from British. So you can tell that the numbers of warships from French and Spanish combined fleet outnumbers the numbers of British. So most likely British was supposed to lose this war, but because the Admiral Nelson, who leads the British Navy, they adopt the so-called Nelson touch tactic, which is Nelson split his fleet into 2 and sailed at the right angles. And you can see this actually the fleet of Spanish and French. Wow, these 2 they are under the command of Nelson. So Nelson split the whole fleet into 2, and they just sail at the right angle in the French and the Spanish line here. And they're trying to split the whole fleet of their opponents, and they're trying to engage in battles with some individual warships. And the result is very dramatic. So the loss ratio of Spanish and French fleet to British Navy fleet is 22-0, which means Spanish and French lost 22 warships, while the British Navy they lost 0. So that's quite effective tactic because, as you can see from the result. And this is a very important victory because it stopped the march of Napoleon Wars. And also it confirms the naval supremacy of Britain has established during the course of the 18th century. So actually, after this war, Admiral Nelson, he was shot and dead after this, and died after this battle. So I'm not trying to turn this presentation into a history class or historical presentation, actually. So I'm trying to use some tactics or some philosophy of this war and trying to apply into a real business world, because we all know that strategy is actually originated from wars. So a lot of books about strategy can also apply to wars, can be applied to business strategies. So I'm trying to bring this up because I work on some corporate entrepreneurship. It's about some, let me go to the next slide. So, so why Nelson? Can British Admiral Nelson can win this battle? And there's two authors mentioned in their book, and they explained the reason why. And quote, Nelson spent considerable time developing his ship captains. He met with them every chance he got to impart his fighting philosophy onto them. He held special dinners to get them acquainted with each other to foster better teamwork. And Nelson's preferences was to rely on the ability of his fighting captains to make their own decision in the heat of battle and to act on the philosophy he had to painstakingly taught them beforehand. So as I mentioned, the first strategy is called line of battle tactics. So the two fleets just face each other. And one of the benefits of this tactic is, they can communicate with each other, the whole fleet. And the flagship can send signals by flag signals. But for Nelson's approach is so different. And in the real battle, they just lost contact with each other. So each captain, they just make their decisions and they're at their own discretion. So I'm trying to use this analogy, this tactic in real business world, because for a lot of multinational companies, who have subsidiaries overseas around the globe, they might just not, communicate with each other as convenient. And in this case, get even more complicated for some multinational from emerging countries like China. For example, by 2011, there's around 13,500 companies in China and set up 18,000 subsidiaries in 177 countries. So that's almost all the countries around the world. So there's around like 190 countries in the world. So there is so many subsidiaries. And also the subsidiaries located in a totally different geographic location, their culture also different, the institutional environment also different. So how to manage this company, the subsidiaries, how to control them? That's actually a challenge for a lot of managers from these multinational companies. And by saying subsidiary, I mean any operational unit controlled by the headquarters of those multinationals and situated outside the home country. So in my research, I'm trying to look at China's multinational companies. So the headquarters will locate in China, while the subsidiary located all around the world. And the kind of relationship between subsidiary and headquarters could be, good, cooperating, and could be conflicting. And that's actually been proved once and once again. And this kind of relationship will be more complicated if you want to take corporate entrepreneurship into consideration. So corporate entrepreneurship is actually a stream of research in entrepreneur study, which means that corporate entrepreneurship means that it's a process actually used to develop new business, new product, new service, or to develop new materials, manufacture products. And this kind of activities are inside the existing organization. So it seems like you are trying to start a new company within a big corporation. And this kind of activity or strategy is very costly and risky. And it involves the commitment of time and resources in some uncertain environment. And the subsidiary or the startups in the company, they need to make some discretions decisions by themselves. So this kind of scenario makes the decision making even more hard. So there's a dilemma for a lot of multinationals, whether they should have a firm control of the subsidiaries, so subsidiary will do whatever they do, or they can give some autonomy, so the subsidiary can conduct some innovative activities like co-op entrepreneurship. And so the research gap in this study is, as I said, there is a dilemma whether to control or whether they should give them discretion. If you follow the control approach, which is actually adopted by a lot of multinationals from those developed countries. And the kind of theory behind this kind of approach is, we call them agency theory. So a lot of researchers use agency theory to explain the relationship between the headquarters and subsidiaries. And the headquarters like a principal and subsidiaries like agency. So they use a lot of variables, control variables, like centralization, formalization, tension, power tensions, control and coordination, embeddedness, hierarchy. So the whole organization is like a very high hierarchy organization. I remember I worked for a Fortune 500 company before, and it was a Japanese company, and the headquarters in Tokyo, and they have subsidiary around the world. So I was in China, and the headquarters, they try and have a firm control of all subsidiaries. They send some Japanese managers around the world. They're trying to take everything under control. And if you bring up some new ideas and you have to give it to the the subsidiary manager, then go back to the headquarters. And a lot of innovative, some new ideas will be just filtered in that level. I remember back then there was like cameras, being embedded in cell phones, and we just tell the managers, maybe we should think about have cameras in cell phones. But they don't listen to that. They say camera is camera, cell phone, but we all know what happened today. So it's just an example of how they just control subsidiaries. So as I said, most of the research about headquarters subsidiaries, they are all originated from advanced economies, and they adopt so-called agency theory to explain the relationship. So, but for emerging economy, I mean, multinationals from emerging economies like from India, from China, from Russia, that will be a totally different story. And the institutional environment in these countries, they brought some disadvantage to those multinationals in the global competition arena. And those multinationals, they arrive late in the international market compared with developed countries, both at the firm level or the country level. And also the managers in those multinational companies from emerging countries, they are lacking of the skills of the management of the modern corporate management system. And they always have a negative international image, for example, some inferior product quality for the, some scandals. And so agency theory, which is widely adopted by research of multinational corporations from developed countries, might be inappropriate as a theoretical lens to analyze such a relationship for EMNC. By saying EMNC, I mean MNCs from multinational corporations from emerging economies. Okay, so that is actually the first research gap. So I'm trying to borrow the idea of Nelson. I coined the word as Nelson touch model to explain, this relationship. So Nelson touch model refers to developing a nimble and autonomous relationship between headquarters and subsidiary to unleash and disperse corporate entrepreneurship in multinational corporations. And a lot of benefits of such approach, such as subsidiaries local entrepreneurial opportunity fast, because for entrepreneurial opportunity, they always, pop up really fast and you have to grasp it, or otherwise it disappears or taken by your competitors. And also it can reduce the weakness of home-originated of those headquarters. And also multinational corporations, they engage more creative improvisations. Improvisation means you have to react really to the changes around you. You have to make up a plan real quick, and the solutions, clever solutions to local or global problems. And it also helps to build some, we call it global option portfolio, which means you have different options to choose from, and you develop them at the same time in like product development, R&D investment, and international journal venture opportunities. Okay, that's what is Nelson Touch model is about. So in my research, I'm trying to address the following three questions. The first question is, we all know that multinational corporations from developed countries, they adopt the control management mechanism. Everything is under the hierarchy organization structure, and also they're trying to take control of everything. And we know that it might not be good for the developing countries. So is there any alternative management mechanism for multinational corporations from emerging countries? Because you see, these subsidiaries, they're in a totally different environment. And the second research question is, if there is an alternative management mechanism, and how does it affect their performance, like entrepreneurship performance? And there is a kind of entrepreneurship activity called subsidiary initiatives. And the subsidiary initiative means subsidiaries are going to identify some entrepreneurial opportunities and conduct some, some R&D and develop some new product or new services, new processes. I have a definition letter. Next research question is, if the headquarters and subsidiary, they are far apart from each other, their institutional environment is different, geographic location is different, cultures are different, whether the communication effectiveness could affect those kind of relationships. When I'm telling the story for the flagship and the captains of a fleet, a British fleet, how they communicate, that is a very important, variable, because during the battle, during the real war, it's hard to communicate. But before the war, Nelson spent a huge amount of time to tell them, to educate the captains about his tactics, about his fighting philosophies. So whether this kind of communication, they can work similarly to the multinationals, headquarters and the subsidiaries. Okay, do you want me to stop for questions, or you want me to finish everything and then you can ask questions in the end?
I'll be happy to ask a couple of questions, Xiaomi.
Great.
Only if you want me to interrupt. If you want to continue, then that's fine. It's your call.
Oh, okay. Sure. I like to hear some questions before you forget, or before I jump too far.
Oh, well, because if I ask a question, Dusty is going to be mad at me, so I didn't want to do that. So, do I have his permission to ask? Okay, thank you, Dusty. So, okay, 3 questions very quickly. What is the difference between corporate entrepreneurship that you have presented and what we have discussed in past research as intrapreneurship? So, intrapreneurship is a phenomena within large Fortune 500 companies where small teams try to be entrepreneurial, innovative, aggressive, all of that, and try to break away from the formalized structures and norms of an organization. How are those two concepts different, if at all they are different?
Well, I think that's a great question. Actually, I think there's some research about those two different phenomena. So I'm trying to answer this question. So corporate entrepreneurship means that it is actually the new startup is actually inside the corporation, which means, for example, Google they have different teams working on some new product, and those kind of teams have their discretion of doing anything, but they're still working under, in this company. But entrepreneurship, as I know, they can just build a total different office or different under different names. And if you dig deeper, you will see that it is under, for example, Google, but otherwise people never know that it's actually under corporate entrepreneurship. So that's what I remembered about the difference. I might just go and find more differences and maybe send you a letter.
I would urge you to explore that in more detail.
Okay.
I'm sure the reviewers are going to come back and talk about it, because the way you have described it in your not only hypotheses, but also the build up to the research questions, those are interchangeable as far as I can see. But hey, you are the experts. I would urge you to explore that further.
Okay, that's very important. I will take a note. I will definitely figure out.
Now, I do have a couple of more questions, but I can hold them off till the end. It's your call.
I think it's totally fine. We have almost an hour, and we should have enough time.
Okay, then let me ask the more difficult one, and then I'll get to the easier one. Somehow there seems to be a blanket slamming of the MNCs from emerging nations in what you have said so far, that they have lack of skills, negative international image.
Right.
There seems to be that kind of a theme that I'm hearing from you. But are you not being, let's say, grossly unfair to some of these multinational companies from China, from India? Is anyone going to pretend and tell me that Alibaba, Lenovo, Tata, Infosys, they have a negative image, or they have a lack of skills in expanding into other markets? I would find it very hard to believe. So if you're looking at the technology sector, I would say, au contraire, there is a growing or tremendous respect for multinationals from at least China and India. Where am I going?
Yeah, so the reason I said this is, I'll give you one example, like, Volvo being acquired by Geely, which is a Chinese automaker. And I did a case study about that acquisition. So I learned some interaction happened between Volvo and Geely. So one of the reasons at the beginning, Volvo they didn't want to sell that brand to Geely, because Geely is making some cars and it's about like low-end cars. And if you have ever lived in China, or you went to China, you know that the car is cheap and the quality is far from as good as Volvo's. So the government and the civilians and the press and also Volvo, and at the beginning they don't want to sell this to Geely, because they say we're like a very high-end brand, and we all know Volvo is like a very premium brand all over the world. And if we sell our brand to lower end brand, and that's not good for our image. So it took years for Volvo's CEO to negotiate, to trying to show them the positive side of Geely, like he invited the CEO, even some government officers from Sweden to visit their product line, and told them that what was your impression you had about us like 20, 30 years ago? And now we have a much better assembly line. We have better educated workers, and we have better environment. So that's that could not be the whole picture, but that's an impression. And also some research I found online is talking about, the kind of image, because I know there are a lot of multinational companies from emerging countries. They're playing really well in the international arena, but still people still have some, maybe cliche about their quality of the product, and also about the management skills.
I would ask you to be slightly careful when you frame that in your paper, because if it was the early 2000s, then yes, that theme would be relevant. But in the last 6-7 years, that theme no longer exists, even when you read The Economist or Wall Street Journal. So when you're giving the example of Geely buying over Volvo and all of the concerns, But then the other example will be Tata buying Jaguar and Land Rover, which are again superior luxury brands bought by Tata from India. And there was no concern. Actually, Jaguar, Land Rover were very thrilled that Tata was acquiring them. Anyway, I'm not here to argue with you. I just want to caution you that as you are writing your paper, I would urge you to be more balanced in those statements. I know you're trying to make a point. I respect that.
Right.
But the reviewers may not see it that way. So try to hedge your language while you're writing it. That's all I'm suggesting.
That I really appreciate. That's very important. And I think the other reason I emphasize that at this point is because one of the antecedents or one of the key variables in my research is about the institutional environment. So I know they're like for the multinational companies, they may just learn all the modern management, system, but in terms of institutional environment, there's a big gap between developing countries and developed countries. I have that measurement like 5 or 7 dimensions. So there's some very objective measurement of those institutional environment, and I'm trying to connect this institutional environment with their strategies. So that's part of the reason why I want to emphasize that. Of course, there's a lot of positive side about multinational from emerging economies, such as the price of this product, and also the improvement that have made it in the past couple of maybe years or decades. Yeah, so I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I'll definitely trying to be careful when I make argument about that in the rule paper. Thank you, Dej. Do you have another question, or you want me to move ahead? Okay, I'll move forward, and just stop me if you have any question in the middle. Okay, so so I just talked about the Nelson touch model, and this is actually a theoretical framework that I want to borrow. I built and I borrowed the idea of the Nelson touch model. I'm trying to explain, the management mechanism of multinationals from emerging countries. So as you can see, I have 4 variables. One is formal institutional distance, and communication effectiveness, as the communication happened between the flagship and the subsidiary, the warships, and the trust, which is I'm trying to differentiate from the control mechanism. So I believe trust will be a substitute to the control variable, like I mentioned, formalization, centralization I mentioned, and the subsidiary initiatives. Okay, I'm going to define and explain each variable so you know, what is each variable is about. So the first variable is called subsidiary initiative, which means a discrete, proactive undertaking begun with a foreign subsidiary unit that advances a new way for the cooperation to use or expand its resources. So the main idea of subsidiary initiative is the kind of entrepreneurial activity like innovation, like risk taking, like new product development, conducted by the subsidiaries, okay? And a subsidiary initiative, it typically begins with identification of a product or market opportunity by subsidiary and ends with commitment. So this is actually a definition given by there's a Bigashal in multinational corporation research called Bigashal. And subsidiary initiative is a key manifestation of corporate entrepreneurship. And so this, I'm looking at specifically about this manifestation called subsidiary initiative. And the second variable is called formal institutional distance. And we all know that institutions like the rule of the game, and it's actually provides the guidelines of how a venture should conduct its operation in an environment. And there are 2 dimensions of institutions. One is called a formal institution, like the laws, regulation, all the very formal kind of regulation or laws. And the other way other dimensions called informal, like culture, like norms. Okay, it's not like super strict, but it's still constrain the firm's behaviors and activities. So formal institutional instance is actually the focus of this research, and it refers the extent of discrepancy between the host country and the home country of the institutions. Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you for your contribution, Tej, for the clarification. So formal institutional distance, it increased the difficulty to operate a business in a host country because the rules, the laws, the regulations are so different from the homeland country, and also it's hard to adapt to local preferences and practices, affect the entry mode. And in this research, when I say long formal institutional distance, I'm looking at the advanced economies. So compared with China, what is the institutional environment, how it's different from China? And I have some measurement of that. So if the environment is much better than China, I mean that is a long formal institutional distance. Otherwise, I mean it's a low or short formal institutional distance. Okay, just compare with China. I'm trying to look at that's discrepancies actually. Okay, next concept is trust. So as I said, there are a lot of concepts being studied for the multinational corporations from developed countries like centralization, formalization, control, and so on and so forth. So in this research, I'm trying to look at an alternative management mechanism, which is trust. And trust means the expectation that an exchange partner will not engage in opportunistic behavior despite short-term incentives and certainty about long-term rewards. And it's a very important concept of organizational context. And it's lead to a lot of result like trust, cooperation, like if not trust each other, it might lead to some opportunities behaviors. And the next concept is communication effectiveness. So as war, the captain and the flagship, they just communicate really well at the beginning. Before the real battle, but they just almost no communication in the real battle, and there must be some reasons. So I want to, just to incorporate this variable and to test it, what kind of effect it has on the two relationships I mentioned between the institutional environment to trust and between trust to subsidiary initiatives. So communication effectiveness means the formal and informal sharing of meaningful and timely information between partners, and communication effectiveness is proved to be helpful to a lot of aspects of organizations, such as promote a relationship commitment, trust level, and improve the flow of information knowledge. And also an indicator of a strong relationship, close relationship, between headquarters and subsidiaries. So I have 4 hypotheses, as I mentioned in my theoretical framework. So as you can see, this minimized framework of the hypothesis 1, which is from informal, formal institute distance to trust. So I'm trying to argue that if the institution distance is long, then the trust level will be high. The reason is because by saying long formal institution distance, I'm trying to say that the host country, their institutional environment is more rigid, is more strict. So there will be less opportunistic behaviors of local managers. And also because those managers from those advanced economies, they have better or higher managerial skills and capacity. And also they understand the local institutional environment better. And the third reason is the professionalism embodied in the managers, economies. They will further decrease the concern of agent problem. So all these reasons lead to the first hypothesis, which is the larger or the longer the formal institutional distance between the Chinese headquarters and subsidiary in the advanced economy, the greater trust between them. Okay, that's the first hypothesis here. And the second hypothesis, I'm trying to argue the relationship between the management mechanism of multinational corporations from emerging countries, which is trust. So it's not like control, it's not like a hierarchy, it's now a formalization, it's a trust. So I'm trying to argue the relationship between trust, the new management mechanism, to the result, which is the subsidiary initiative. So I'm trying to argue that trust, they can promote some mutual relationships, build confidence to each other, and trying to lead the development of a better team and better performance. And if the subsidiary receive more trust from headquarters, and they have more support, and more discretion and more autonomy, they have a less time pressure, and they can just focus on their entrepreneurship activities, which is time consuming and also risky. So the second hypothesis is the higher the trust between headquarters and subsidiary, the higher the extent of subsidiary initiative for those EMNCs. And the third hypothesis and the fourth hypothesis are about the moderating effect of communication effectiveness on the two relationships that we mentioned above. So the third hypothesis is about the moderating effect of communication effectiveness to the informal institutional distance and trust. So we believe that better communication will make that positive relationship even better, because we know communication effectiveness can strengthen the frequency, the volume, the speed of information exchange, and also help both sides to understand each other better, and reduce information symmetry. And if any conflict happened, they can just solve the conflict better and facilitate daily operations. So we argue that better communication effectiveness, they positively moderate the two relationships. I mean, the relationships here from information, from formal institutional distance to trust. That's the third hypothesis. And the last hypothesis is about the moderating effect of the communication effectiveness on trust in the subsidiary initiative relationship. So we believe that it should have the similar effect on a relationship between the distance to trust. And we argue that communication effectiveness, it positively moderates the relationship between trust and subsidiary initiatives from MNCs from China. So do you guys have any questions at this point? Or, okay, I'll
Hey, Xiaoming.
Yes,
So you assume that the, how to say it? So China company wants to go to US, but there's also possible that they go to like Pakistan, which has also institutional distance.
Exactly.
So then how does that distance influence the trust? Do you think we will trust the subsidiary in Pakistan more because of the distance?
That's a great question. That's actually been raised by one of the reviewer from the journal we submitted to. So there definitely that distance from Pakistan to China, for example, but we're looking at those developed countries, which means like mostly are European countries or North American countries, because we're trying to see whether there are differences between the control mechanism and the trust mechanism. Because if you go to, because most of the research is about how the multinationals from developed countries, they build subsidiaries overseas in these developing countries or other developed countries. But in this case, in my study, I'm trying to look at what if the emerging economies, multinational companies, they just build a subsidiary in developed countries where they have a better institutional environment? In that case, there the distance is like positive, and in your case, the example is negative. So I'm not actually looking at that section, that's group of companies. So yeah, you are totally right. That could be another direction for future research, but it's not like the concern of this research.
Okay, good, thank you. The second question is, so the institutional distance is a level 2 variable, right? It's a distance between like US and China, level 2 variable.
Yeah. Yes.
The country level variable.
Right, it's
So,
actually.
So the institutional distance for Lavono in China and in the US is the same as the institutional distance for Alibaba in China and in the US, correct?
Exactly, yes.
Then you want to look at how the level 2 variable influence level 1 trust, correct?
Could you just clarify what do you mean by like a level 2 variable?
Level 2 variable is the country level variable.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, you're right. That's another question raised by the reviewer. Yes, it's really a coincidence. I mean, the reviewer asked us the same question, saying China has almost 30 different provinces, and the institutional level are so different at each provinces. So how can you make sure that's that's one level of institutional distance or institutional index could apply to other provinces? That's a good question. And my response is that's very right. There's like almost 30 different provinces, but most of this, and we look at the data and we find that more than 95% of the variables, their headquarters located in Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou, which has very similar institutional distance. So we say, even there are a couple of companies, we actually trying to do excluded that 5% of companies with headquarters not located in Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou, and the result is very similar. So yes, you're right. There could be differences of the institutional index of different provinces. Did I answer your question, Yanhui?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Anne is asking, will I show you my measure of informal institutional distance? Yeah, I will show you the measurement later for sure. All right, so that's the 4 hypotheses, and I'm going to test that with some data. So the data is actually from almost 1,381 firms who has full context details, because there are almost 13,000 Chinese firms has engaged in overseas operations. So I'm trying to send a survey to the people who can make decisions, like senior executives, the owner, the director, CEO, the general manager, who can make a decision of their outward investment. And we're trying to send a survey to both the headquarters and the subsidiaries, which means, for example, Alibaba, we send the survey to the headquarters in Beijing, and also we pick a subsidiary maybe in the United States, and we ask them to answer the survey, together, not together, but separately, but they use similar survey questions. And in the end, we got 2,099 valid responses. So there's less missing variables. There's everything looked complete. And the response rate is about 21.65%. And we have some details about each variable, its construct actually. So we have subsidiary, we have 5 items. We have the Cron-Batch alpha of both the headquarters and the subsidiaries. So you can see that. So this variable, this measurement is borrowed from the big shot, which is a big shot from multinational corporation research. So the Cron-Batch alpha of both headquarters subsidiary, they're similar and they're good. Formal institutional distance, we have same items with headquarters and subsidiary Cron-Batch alpha similar to each other. trust, headquarters, subsidiary, they're close, communication effectiveness, 5 items, thermal or combat alpha from headquarters subsidiary. And this is the descriptive statistics. Everything looks good. And this is the regression result. So there's 4 hypotheses tested in this analysis. So as you can see, the dependent variable here is trust, and the independent variable is formal institutional distance. The result is positive and significant, which means the longer the formal institutional distance, the better trust they have between the headquarters and subsidiaries. And hypothesis 2 is about how trust affect subsidiary initiatives. And the result is positive and significant. So it has supported our second hypothesis as well. And the third hypothesis is about the moderating effect of communication effectiveness. So CE stands for communication effectiveness. FID is formal institutional distance. The interaction is positive and significant. So the first moderation effect is supported. And the fourth hypothesis is not supported. Even the coefficient is a negative. So the 4 hypotheses, the first 3 hypotheses are supported and the last one is not supported. And we also tested the models by switch to some other dependent variable. So for the other models, we use subsidiary initiative, which is kind of it's an entrepreneurial activities. And we are trying to see whether the entrepreneurial activity of subsidiaries have a positive effect on performance. So we use profitability and return on investment as dependent variable, and also return on assets. The 2 dependent variable, the relationship is positive and significant. ROA is not significant. So that's the result of the regression. That's another half of the regression table. So the moderating effect of communication effectiveness on the formal institutional distance and trust is significant. So as you can see from this figure, if you have a higher communication level, okay, then you have, which is this line, then the relationship between the distance and trust is more positive. It's have a steeper slope. And if you have a lower communication effectiveness, you have a lower, less steeper slope here. So that is what hypothesis 3 is about. Okay, we also tested the mediating effect of trust, because in the model you can see trust located between the distance and the performance, which is subsidiary initiative. And we tested this mediating effect by running bootstrapping method, and we found that trust actually played as a mediator in that model. So that's some extra findings of this research. So look at the result, and we found that for multinational corporations, especially if they're from emerging economies, they should allocate more trust to subsidiaries if they have a longer institutional distance. So back to Yanhui's question, if for subsidiary located in some developing countries, if their distance is long but it's negative in my research, okay, or similar distance, then that's might be the case, because they have a bad institutional distance, so you cannot trust their enforcement of the law, cannot trust their their managers' management professionalism. So I didn't know the result, but for developed countries, better trust, more trust is helpful to subsidiaries initiatives. And also communication as a moderator is instrumental, is helpful in building trust between headquarters and subsidiary. But from trust to subsidiary initiative, the result is not significant. So it just works for the first half of the relationship. And our Nelson Touch model is helpful in explaining the kind of relationship, which is cooperative and interdependent, like the flagship and the captains of the real war of Trafalgar. It's kind of you should rely on each other, you should trust each other, you should depend on each other. It is similarly to headquarters and subsidiaries of multinational from emerging economies. And the paper is suffering from a couple of limitations, like okay, we have the measurement of formal institutional distance is from survey data, and its perceptions of these managers about the institutional environment of a certain country or certain place. And secondly, we have some mediators, other mediators like centralization, formalization, commitment. We should also test that. So that could be a direction for the future research. And also other moderators like observative capacity. If you have a better observable capacity, you may learn faster and your performance could be better. And that could have a different effect to the relationships we mentioned in the model. I'm going to share my measurement, in the paper.
Xiaoming, can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So this Nelson's Touch thing and your comment about principal agent models has really kind of slowly been churning in my brain because I love principal agent models. And I guess since I'm not super familiar with the way that you're talking about this,
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm not messing anything up. But when you look at a principal agent model, so like going back to the Nelson's Touch idea, right? So the British were outnumbered, and Nelson's goal was to deliver autonomy to these agents, right, to his agents, in order to basically try and counter the fact that they were outnumbered, right? But the thing about a principal agent model is that you end up with a whole bunch of noise because you're basically, instead of directly supervising everyone, you are relinquishing control to these other groups who you hope have your best interest at heart. And if you set up your problem correctly, they should have your best interest at heart.
Yep.
And so when you look at these subsidiaries, and I'm not sure if this is what you mean by trust, but do you think that you might see some sort of basically risk measurement in how people are choosing to centralize or decentralize their behavior through these subsidiaries, where if you are risk averse, decentralizing has the potential to make really amazing things. It also has the potential to blow up in your face. So if you're risk averse, you would avoid at any cost allowing anyone else any control, because allowing them control could go wrong. And that would be how you would frame it to yourself, right? But if you are on the other side and you say, you know what, I'm maybe a small company, maybe I'm not the dominant player in my field, but what I need to do is maximize the potential for a big gain. Then you would move in the direction of trusting your smaller, your subsidiaries to basically take shots and hope that something good comes of it.
Right.
And so is that what you're measuring here?
Okay, for subsidiary initiative, it's and we have 5 dimensions, like new product developed in host country, successful bid for corporate investment in host country, new international business activities at the first start in host country, enhance the product lines, new corporate investment in R&D or manufacturing tried by China's management. So you're very right. So the activities conducted by initiatives by the subsidiaries, in this case, we're trying to look at those riskier or those activities with some uncertain result. So the measurement of subsidiary initiative, they have some kind of elements of risk taking in the measurement. So we measured somewhat to some extent of the manager or the person in charge, their risk-taking propensity. So if I'm more risk-taking, this subsidiary initiative will be higher. And we're trying to see whether if you have more trust, okay, whether it leads to more, willingness of their subsidiary managers to, undertaking some riskier or entrepreneurial activities.
Okay.
So do I answer your question, or do you have like more specific questions?
No, I'm just trying to make sure I understand how you're talking about it, and so I think that helps.
Okay, so as Nelson's the war of Talgafat, in that battle, Nelson just gave a lot of trust to their captains, but they had a lot of communication beforehand. I mean, before the war, they invited the captains for dinner together. They just communicate their fighting strategies. And in real war, they lost the contact. They know that this will be super messy, and every captain has a different environment, and very similar to a subsidiary located in a different country. So you cannot just communicate as effectively as you did, before the battle. And in that kind of scenario, the control mechanism or the agency theory, because agent theory, like the line of the battle, that's tactic. You know what is happening, and you line up, you face to face, and you can see each other, and you can just receive signals. That is like a control approach. But for those autonomy or trust approach, you just lost contact, or you're better not to communicate that much. So trust might works better. And I'm sure that's with the development of institutional environment in these emerging countries, in the future, trust will definitely be replaced by those modern, management mechanism like formalization and so on and so forth.
Okay, I mean, in a lot of situations, that's not even possible though. And so the principal agent model still persists because in lots of places we can't supervise, right?
Right.
Like if you think, if you think about like an engineering firm, you might have a manager in an engineering firm who is great at business, right? And sells things and does really well on that side. But at the same time, they have no idea what the engineering team is actually doing per se, because they're focused on the business side rather than on the engineering side. And so they have to have that level of trust, even if there's tons of institutions, because they have to trust that that group of people is still doing something useful, right? They have to still trust that that the engineers are actually designing new things or making improvements. And so, I don't think it goes away even if you have, an extremely advanced management. But I think that, how you line it up leads to a lot of benefits, So like, if you go back to Nelson again, just as an example, because, you talked about how the Spanish and French fleets lost 22 ships and the English lost none. Well, that's one outcome, right? If by some chance, someone had failed to grasp his strategy and had deviated, it could have been catastrophic in the other direction. And that risk was something that they accepted in order to have the ability to use their smaller force against a larger force. And in the same sense, if you have a smaller firm and you need more agility to be able to counter a large firm with lots of funding, you might be willing to tolerate that risk of sometimes it's going to go really well and sometimes we're going to get totally destroyed in a market, or you don't, and then you would revert away from that trust model back to something that gives you greater amounts of control.
Yeah, I agree. I know we are talking about. Yes, so even for developed countries, they still need to give a lot of trust to their R&D department, to their subsidiaries if you want them come up with some new product. Yes, that's very right. But we believe that for multinational corporations from emerging countries, they need even more trust because they usually can just control their subsidiaries, even they can give them trust, but they're not just don't have that much of experience, or they need time to understand the culture, the institutional environment of those host countries. So that's actually the main focus of the research. Multinational cooperation from emerging economies who build subsidiaries in those developed countries with a better institutional environment.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
Okay, thank you for the question, Dusty. Oh, it's almost one. So 1 more minute. So do you have any last minute question?
Xiaoming, the formal institutional distance is actually perceived distance, right? I don't know whether you should label that way, because it's not the actual institutional distance between US and China. It is the perceived, individually perceived distance for each company, I think.
Exactly. So this is actually 7 measurement questions of formal institutional distance, like political systems, government policies, transparency of government for citizens, political risk, so on and so forth. Actually, I did a robust test with some variables like measuring the enforcement of laws, for example. I tested that, and I had some similar result. So I trust with 2 different formal institutional distance variable, and one with enforcement, law enforcement, that's very similar, and the other one is not working. So that's why I put it as a limitation of this research. A lot of these variables are perceptions, but again, the distance is actually are about kind of some psychological perceptions. For example, power distance. It's a very mature variable, and it's a kind of psychological perception of people living in different like countries. So yeah, that's one limitation of this research. I totally agree. Yes. All right. If there's no questions, thank you so much for attending my brown bag presentation. Thank you for all those questions, for these suggestions. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Yanhui. Thank you, Michelle. Yep. So if you have more questions, please feel free to send me emails, and also maybe just we can have another Zoom meeting. Thank you, Anne and Ta. Thank you, Ben. So that's all for my presentation today, and you have a good rest of the day and a good weekend. Bye-bye. Scared of. I held my books.